The autumn rain turned the cobblestone road into a crimson river, as Captain Marcus Vale found her crumpled beneath the ancient oak, a woman in torn silk, her golden hair matted with blood, clutching a royal seal he'd seen buried with Princess Ilara 3 months ago. She looked up with eyes that haunted his dreams, the same violet eyes that had watched him from palace windows during his 10 years of faithful service. "Marcus," she whispered, "they're going to kill the king tonight." Vale had sworn an oath to protect the crown, but the princess was supposed to be dead. He'd stood guard at her funeral. Yet here she was, bearing scars that told stories of imprisonment and torture, speaking of traitors within the castle walls. She knew things only Ilara could know, their childhood friendship, the secret passages, even the birthmark on his shoulder from their forbidden kiss years ago. The kingdom's fate hung in the balance, but which truth would destroy everything he believed in, that she was an impostor, or that everything he'd protected was already lost? Marcus knelt beside her, his leather gauntlets scraping against wet stone. The royal seal felt warm in his palm, its familiar weight sending ice through his veins. He'd watched the court jeweler place this very seal in Ilara's cold hands before they lowered her coffin into the royal crypt. "You died of fever," he said, his voice barely audible above the rain. "I carried your coffin myself." The woman's laugh was bitter, broken. "They needed you to believe that. Uncle Aldrich couldn't risk anyone questioning the succession." She struggled to sit up, wincing as fresh blood seeped through her tattered dress. The coffin held another girl, a servant who bore enough resemblance after they finished with her face. Thunder rolled overhead, matching the storm brewing in Marcus's chest. Lord Aldrich, the king's younger brother, had assumed regency when grief rendered King Thaddeus unable to rule. The arrangement was meant to be temporary, just until the king recovered from losing his only heir. "Show me proof," Marcus demanded, though his heart already recognized the curve of her smile, the defiant tilt of her chin when challenged. Ilara, if this truly was Ilara, pulled aside the torn fabric at her shoulder, revealing a crescent-shaped birthmark he'd traced with trembling fingers during stolen moments in the castle gardens. Only he and the princess had known of it, hidden as it was beneath layers of courtly dress. "Do you remember what I told you the night before my supposed death?" she asked, violet eyes never leaving his face. Marcus's throat tightened. "You said you'd found something in your father's study, documents that proved someone was embezzling from the royal treasury. And you told me to wait, to gather more evidence before making accusations." Her voice turned sharp with old pain. "I should have listened. Instead, I confronted Uncle Aldrich directly. He couldn't let me live after that." The pieces fell together like a sword through flesh. The princess's sudden illness had been convenient. No witnesses, no chance for farewells, just a swift decline and a closed coffin funeral. Aldrich had insisted on handling all arrangements personally, claiming grief made the king unfit for such decisions. "Where have you been for 3 months?" Marcus asked, though part of him feared the answer. The Black Tower. The old fortress had been abandoned for decades, its dungeons a whispered nightmare. Uncle Aldrich kept me alive, hoping I'd reveal everything I knew about his schemes. When I finally convinced him I'd told no one else, he planned to dispose of me quietly. "How did you escape?" Ilara's smile was sharp as a blade. "The guard who brought my final meal remembered a kindness I'd shown his daughter years ago. He left my cell door unlocked and looked the other way." She gripped Marcus's arm with desperate strength. "But I learned something terrible before I fled. Tonight, during the harvest feast, Uncle Aldrich plans to poison Father's wine. With me officially dead and the king following, he'll claim the throne as the rightful heir." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. The harvest feast was the kingdom's most sacred tradition, where nobles and commoners alike gathered to honor the crown. Security would be tight, but ceremonial. If someone wanted to eliminate the king in full view of his subjects while appearing innocent, "We have to warn him," Marcus said, already calculating the fastest route back to the castle. "Who would believe you?" Ilara struggled to stand, accepting his supporting arm. Aldrich commands the loyalty of half the guard now. He spent 3 months positioning his people in key roles. Even if we could reach farther, Aldrich would simply claim I'm an imposter, some desperate actress hired to undermine his regency. Rain plastered her hair to her skull, making her appear almost ghostly in the dying light. Marcus studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, any tell that might reveal an elaborate ruse. But those eyes, no amount of training could replicate the way she looked at him, the weight of shared secrets and buried feelings. "Then what do you propose?" he asked. Princess Ilara straightened, and for a moment Marcus glimpsed the queen she might have become. "We're going to save my father and destroy my uncle, but first we need allies, and we need proof that even Aldrich's supporters cannot ignore." Thunder crashed overhead, and Marcus made his choice. The woman's eyes never left Gareth's face as he helped her to her feet, her grip surprisingly strong despite her obvious injuries. Blood had dried in dark streaks down her arms, and her once fine dress hung in tatters. But there was something in her bearing that made him pause. Even wounded and desperate, she carried herself with an unmistakable grace. "You don't believe me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can see it in your eyes." Gareth glanced toward the castle walls looming in the distance, their torches flickering like fallen stars. "Princess Lirale died 3 days ago. I was there when they brought her body back from the northern pass. The funeral pyre burned until dawn." "Then whose body did they burn?" The woman swayed slightly, and Gareth instinctively steadied her. "Because I assure you, Sir Gareth, I am very much alive." The use of his name sent a chill through him. Few people outside the royal court knew the names of individual guards, and fewer still would recognize him in the darkness. He studied her face more carefully, noting the high cheekbones, the particular shade of green in her eyes. A resemblance, certainly, but resemblances could be cultivated by those with enough skill and motivation. "Anyone could have learned my name," he said carefully. "The real princess would know things that others wouldn't." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Very well. You have a scar on your left shoulder from when you fell from the training yard wall as a boy. You were trying to impress the older pages, and instead you landed on a broken piece of pottery. The wound festered for weeks because you were too proud to tell anyone how you'd gotten it." Gareth's hand moved unconsciously toward his shoulder. That particular detail was known to perhaps 3 people in the entire kingdom, and 2 of them were dead. Princess Lirale had tended the wound herself when she was barely 10 years old, sneaking healing salves from the castle's infirmary. "That proves nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The princess might have told others. She never told anyone, just as you never told anyone about the nightmares that started after your father died in the border wars, or how you used to practice sword forms in the moonlight because you were afraid you weren't good enough to protect those who mattered." The words hit him like physical blows. These weren't casual secrets shared in confidence. They were private moments, conversations held in the depths of grief and uncertainty when a young princess had befriended a struggling guard's apprentice. "If you truly are Princess Lale," Gareth said slowly, "then who lies dead in your place? And why would someone want the kingdom to believe you're gone?" She moved closer, her voice dropping to barely a breath. "Because my dear cousin Aldrich needed me out of the way before father's health fails completely. A living princess can claim her birthright. A dead one cannot contest a succession." The implications crashed over Gareth like a cold wave. Prince Aldrich, King Theron's nephew, had indeed been more visible at court lately, taking on additional duties as the king's mysterious illness worsened. The official story was that he was dutifully supporting his ailing uncle. But if Princess Lirale was the rightful heir, the attack on the northern pass, he said, pieces falling into place. It was no random bandit raid. Aldrich's men dressed as bandits. They were supposed to kill me cleanly and bring back my body as proof. But I escaped during the fighting, wounded but alive. They needed a corpse to maintain the illusion, so they... She shuddered. "Some poor merchant's daughter, I think. Similar build, similar hair, burned beyond recognition, as Aldrich no doubt planned from the beginning." Gareth felt sick. The woman they had mourned, whose death had sent the entire kingdom into grief, was a complete stranger. Meanwhile, the real princess had been wandering the wilderness, injured and hunted. "Why come to me?" he asked. "Why not go directly to the king?" "Because I don't know how deep this conspiracy runs. Aldrich has had months to place his people in key positions. Guards, servants, advisors, any of them could be compromised. But I remember you, Gareth. You took an oath to protect the royal family, and you've never broken an oath in your life." The weight of decision pressed down on him. If she was telling the truth, then helping her was his duty. But if this was an elaborate deception, if enemies of the kingdom had found a woman who resembled the princess and fed her carefully gathered intelligence, then he could be walking into a trap that would destroy everything he'd sworn to protect. "There's a way to be certain," he said finally. "Something only the real princess would know." She nodded, understanding the necessity. "Ask me anything." Gareth thought carefully, then spoke. "What did you give me on the morning of my oath ceremony?" For a moment, her composure cracked, and he saw not a potential pretender or political conspirator, but simply a frightened young woman who had lost everything. "A white rose," she whispered, "from the castle's private garden. You said you had no family to witness the ceremony, so I wanted you to carry something beautiful." The abandoned watchtower loomed against the storm-darkened sky as Gareth guided his horse through the muddy forest path. Behind him, the woman who claimed to be Princess Lyanna swayed dangerously in the saddle, her breathing shallow and labored. Every few minutes he glanced back, expecting to find her unconscious or worse, gone entirely, as if she were nothing more than a fever dream brought on by too many sleepless nights on patrol. But she remained stubbornly real, blood still seeping through the makeshift bandages he'd torn from his own cloak. The tower had been abandoned for decades, its stones weathered grey and covered in creeping vines. Gareth had discovered it during his early days as a guard, when Captain Aldrich had sent him on lengthy perimeter sweeps to build character. Now it would serve as sanctuary, or tomb, depending on whether the woman's injuries proved fatal. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Her weight nearly sent them both sprawling into the mud, but she managed to stay upright, leaning heavily against his shoulder. "I can walk," she whispered, though her legs shook with the effort. "Of course you can, Your Highness," Gareth muttered, unsure whether he spoke in mockery or genuine deference. The tower's interior was dark and musty, filled with the scent of old wood and decay. Gareth had stored supplies here over the years, blankets, dried food, lamp oil. He'd told himself it was merely prudent preparation for extended patrols, but truthfully, there had always been a part of him that imagined someday needing to disappear entirely. He lit a lamp with shaking hands while she collapsed onto a pile of blankets in the corner. In the flickering light, he could see her more clearly than he had in the forest. The resemblance to Princess Lyanna was undeniable, the same delicate bone structure, the same unusual violet eyes that had been the subject of countless court paintings. But where the princess had been soft and pampered, this woman bore the lean hardness of someone who had endured genuine hardship. "You're staring," she said, wincing as she shifted position. "You're supposed to be dead. I think staring is warranted." She laughed, a bitter sound that quickly turned into a cough. "Dead. Yes, that was rather the point, wasn't it? Much easier to eliminate an inconvenient princess if everyone believes she's already gone." Gareth knelt beside her, examining the wound in her side. It was deep but clean, a knife thrust rather than the jagged tear of a wild animal. "Who did this to you?" "My beloved stepmother's men. 3 of them, sent to ensure I stayed dead this time." Her voice carried a venom he'd never heard from the gentle princess he remembered. "I killed 2 before the 3rd got lucky." "That's impossible. She was." Gareth struggled with the pronouns, with the sheer impossibility of the situation. Princess Lyanna couldn't hurt a butterfly. She once cried when the cook killed a chicken for dinner. People change when their survival depends on it. The woman's eyes fixed on his with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Tell me, Gareth Fletcher of Housestone, do you remember the scar on my left shoulder?" He froze. Princess Lyanna had indeed carried a crescent-shaped scar on her shoulder, the result of a childhood fall from her horse. It was not common knowledge. He'd only learned of it during a formal escort duty when he'd noticed her favoring that arm. How could you know about? She pulled aside the torn fabric of her dress, revealing the familiar white mark against her pale skin. But now it was accompanied by dozens of others, thin lines that spoke of blades and worse. Because I am Lyanna Valethorn, daughter of King Marcus, rightful heir to the Thornlands. Her voice grew stronger with each word, carrying an authority that made him want to kneel. And I have spent 3 years learning exactly who I can trust in this kingdom. Your name was on a very short list. Gareth sat back on his heels, his mind reeling. The funeral. I saw. We all saw. You saw what Queen Morwen wanted you to see. A body, burned beyond recognition, presented as evidence of a tragic riding accident. Lyanna's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Though I suspect the serving girl who died in my place had never seen a horse in her life. This is madness. If what you're saying is true, then why reveal yourself now? Why risk everything? Because 3 years of hiding and gathering intelligence have finally borne fruit. Despite her injuries, Lyanna managed to sit straighter, and for a moment Gareth saw not the wounded woman before him, but the queen she was meant to become. I know who killed my father, I know how they did it, and I know they're planning to eliminate the last obstacles to their power within the fortnight. What obstacles? My younger brother, and anyone loyal enough to ask inconvenient questions about his eventual disappearance. She fixed him with that piercing stare again. People like Captain Aldrich. People like you. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across her face, and Gareth felt the ground shift beneath everything he'd believed about duty, loyalty, and truth. The abandoned watchtower's stone walls felt like a tomb as Marcus paced before the woman who claimed impossible things. Dawn light filtered through cracked shutters, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move with his restless energy. She sat propped against the far wall, her borrowed cloak pulled tight around shoulders that trembled despite the growing warmth. "Start from the beginning," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the hollow space. Every detail. She lifted her chin, and for a moment he saw something regal in the gesture, a practiced composure that made his chest tighten. 3 nights ago I was in my chambers preparing for sleep when Sir Aldwyn came to my door. He said my father wanted to see me urgently about wedding arrangements. Marcus knew Aldwyn, a knight of 20 years' service, greying and reliable, the kind of man who'd never raised his voice in the halls, never attracted attention. Go on. He led me through passages I'd never seen before. Servant corridors, he said, to avoid disturbing the household. Her fingers worried the cloak's edge. When we reached what I thought would be my father's study, there were others waiting. Lord Voss, Captain Thorne, and, she swallowed hard, Chancellor Brennan. The names hit Marcus like hammer blows, not ambitious young knights or foreign agents, but men who'd served the crown for decades, men he'd shared meals with in the guards hall, men he'd trusted to watch his back in palace corridors. They had wine waiting, said it was to celebrate the betrothal announcement. Her laugh held no humor. I should have known. The way they watched me drink, like vultures circling prey. Marcus stopped pacing. Poison? Not to kill, to make me compliant, weak. When the room started spinning, I knew. She pressed her palms against her temples. Lord Voss explained everything while I fought to stay conscious. The kingdom needed new leadership. My father was too soft, too trusting. The neighboring kingdoms saw weakness, planned invasion. Your father's policies have kept us at peace for 15 years, Marcus said sharply. That's what I said. Blood had dried in dark crescents under her fingernails. Brennan laughed. Said peace was just delayed conquest. Better to appear weak while building strength in the shadows. Better to have a ruler who understood the world's true nature. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. You're betrothed. Prince Garrett of Ravenshollow. She nodded. He was their choice from the beginning. His father has been testing our borders for months. small raids, missing caravans. Nothing large enough to justify war, but enough to gauge response time, patrol patterns. Her voice cracked. I was to be a wedding gift, a legitimizing bride for an occupying prince. Marcus felt the world tilting beneath his feet. He'd helped plan security for those border regions, had wondered at the peculiar patterns of the attacks, random enough to seem like banditry, but positioned to reveal crucial intelligence about defensive capabilities. When I refused to cooperate, they stopped being gentle. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped bruises circling her wrist. Sir Aldwyn held me while Voss outlined their plan. Stage my death, a riding accident, they thought. Tragic but believable. My father would be devastated, vulnerable, easy to manipulate in his grief. The funeral, Marcus whispered. I stood honor guard at your funeral. A coffin full of stones and pig's blood. Bitterness sharpened her words. While the kingdom mourned, I was locked in the old dungeons beneath the east wing. They kept me drugged, questioned me about my father's habits, his trusted advisors, who might resist their plans. Marcus remembered those days after the princess's death. The king had aged years in hours, moving through the palace like a broken man. He'd stopped attending council meetings, delegating more authority to his advisors. To men like Brennan and Voss, how did you escape? The kitchen girl who brought my food, Mara, she recognized me, knew something was wrong, started watering down whatever drugs they gave me. She touched her temple where a dark bruise shadowed her hairline. When my head cleared enough, I realized they were keeping me alive for a reason. Insurance, maybe, or leverage if their plans went wrong. The night you fled? Aldwyn got drunk, sloppy. Mara had hidden lockpicks in my bread for 3 days. When he passed out in his chair, she shrugged. I ran. But they know I'm alive now. Mara paid the price for helping me. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus thought of the kitchen girl, barely 16, quick to smile when she brought meals to the guard stations. His hands clenched into fists. You still haven't told me why I should believe any of this, he said quietly. She studied his face in the growing light. Because you already do. Because you've seen the signs but told yourself they meant something else. Because somewhere in your heart, you know your kingdom is being sold to the highest bidder while you stand guard over empty ceremonies. The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the dawn sky, its crumbling stones offering meager shelter from the morning wind. Kael had chosen this place carefully, far enough from the palace to avoid patrols, yet close enough to the old merchant's road that they could disappear quickly if needed. He watched Lirali huddle against the far wall, her torn dress doing little to ward off the chill that seeped through the gaps in the ancient masonry. She hadn't spoken since they'd fled the forest, and her silence gnawed at him more than any interrogation might have. The woman who claimed to be Princess Lirali sat with her knees drawn to her chest, staring at nothing with eyes that held depths he couldn't fathom. Blood still matted her golden hair, though whether it was hers or belonged to another remained unclear. Tell me about the scar, Kael said finally, breaking the oppressive quiet. Her gaze shifted to him, sharp and calculating, despite her bedraggled appearance. Which one? The one on your left shoulder blade. From when you fell from the apple tree in the palace gardens. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. You think you're clever, testing me with childhood memories only the real princess would know? She turned slightly, and even through the tears in her dress, he could see the thin white line that marked her skin. I was 7. Cook had made honey cakes, and I wanted the biggest apple from the highest branch. I climbed higher than I should have, and the branch snapped. Kael's throat tightened. He remembered that day, how Princess Lirali had cried more from embarrassment than pain, how she'd made him promise not to tell her father about her foolish adventure. The captain of the guard found me, she continued, her voice softer now. A young man, barely 20, with kind eyes and steady hands. He cleaned my wound and told me that bravery and foolishness often looked the same from a distance. The words hit him like a physical blow. He had said exactly that, word for word, to a frightened little girl who'd reminded him too much of his own lost sister. No one else had been present. No one else could know. Lirale. Her name fell from his lips like a prayer and a curse combined. Do you believe me? She rose gracefully despite her disheveled state, and for a moment he saw past the blood and dirt to the regal bearing that had been trained into her since birth. Or do you need more proof that your princess didn't die in that fire? Kyle's mind raced, trying to reconcile this living, breathing woman with the charred remains they'd found in the tower. The body we found remains. Your father identified. My father identified what he was meant to identify. Her voice turned sharp, bitter. Tell me, Kyle, how thoroughly did you examine those remains? How certain were you that they belonged to me? The question struck home with uncomfortable accuracy. The fire had been devastating, leaving little more than bones and ash. The identification had been based on location, jewelry, and the king's own desperate need to believe his daughter's suffering had ended quickly. Kyle had harbored doubts then, small niggling concerns about inconsistencies in the scene, but grief and duty had silenced his investigative instincts. Someone wanted the kingdom to believe I was dead, Lirale continued, moving closer. Someone with access to the tower, to my chambers, to my personal effects, someone who could arrange for a body to be found, and who could ensure that body would be too damaged to identify properly. Why? The question escaped him before he could stop it. Why fake your death? Why hide for 3 years? Her expression darkened, and for a moment she looked far older than her 22 years, because the alternative was being murdered for real, because I discovered something that certain people would kill to keep hidden, something that reaches to the very heart of the palace. Before Kyle could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the morning air. Multiple horses, moving fast and with purpose. His hand instinctively went to his sword as he moved to the narrow window, peering through the gaps in the stone. A patrol of palace guards rode hard along the Merchant's Road, their armor gleaming in the early light. At their head rode Sir Marcus Blackwood, the current captain of the guard, Kyle's own replacement after his exile. The man's scarred face was set in grim determination as he pointed toward their hiding place. They found us, Kyle whispered, then turned to find Lirale already gathering the few supplies they'd brought. Her face showed no surprise, only resigned preparation. Then it's time you learned the truth about who really wants me dead, she said, moving toward the tower's rear entrance. And why trusting anyone in that palace, including your former brothers-in-arms, could get us both killed before sunset. The hoofbeats grew closer, and Kyle faced a choice that would define everything that followed. The princess led him through a maze of forgotten passages that Gareth never knew existed, despite his years of service within these walls. Dust motes danced in the pale moonlight, filtering through narrow arrow slits, and their footsteps echoed softly against ancient stone. Every shadow seemed to harbor potential threats, and Gareth's hand never strayed far from his sword hilt. How do you know about these tunnels? He whispered, his voice barely audible. My grandfather showed them to me when I was 7, she replied without turning back. He said every ruler should know their castle secrets. Father never approved of such knowledge. The details struck him as authentic. King Aldrich had indeed been protective of his daughter, perhaps overly so. But doubt continued to gnaw at Gareth's mind like a persistent ache. Anyone could have learned such information with enough planning and infiltration. They emerged into a circular chamber lit by a single torch that Lyanna somehow knew would be there. Ancient tapestries depicting long-dead kings adorned the walls, their faces worn but still bearing the distinctive Caldrus features, the same sharp cheekbones and determined jaw that Gareth saw in the woman before him. This was my sanctuary, she said, settling onto a stone bench carved into the wall. When the court became too suffocating, when Father's expectations grew too heavy, I would come here to think. Gareth remained standing, his senses alert for any sign of ambush. If you're truly Princess Lyanna, prove it. Tell me something only she would know. A sad smile crossed her lips. You're thinking like a guard, not like the boy who used to sneak me honey cakes from the kitchen. His breath caught. Few people knew about those childhood indiscretions when a young page had shown kindness to a lonely princess. Anyone could have. You were terrified of Cook Mata discovering the missing cakes, she continued. So I started leaving coins under the flour sack to pay for them. You never knew that, did you? The memory hit him with startling clarity. He'd always wondered why Mata never questioned the disappearing sweets. Only Liana could have known about the secret payments. Still, he forced himself to remain skeptical. Clever, but you could have tortured that information from someone. Then ask me something else. Test me until you're satisfied. For the next hour, he subjected her to an interrogation that would have broken most pretenders. He asked about childhood pets, private conversations, the scar on her left ankle from a riding accident when she was 12. She answered every question with ease, providing details that no outsider should have possessed. The night before your supposed death, he said finally, we argued. What about? Her expression darkened. You begged me not to go riding alone, said you'd had dreams of danger. I called you superstitious and told you I didn't need a nursemaid. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I should have listened. The weight of truth settled over him like a heavy cloak. This was Princess Liana, alive against all odds, which meant everything else he'd believed for the past 2 years was a lie. How did you survive? We found your body. I saw it myself. You saw what they wanted you to see. My cousin Elena bore a passing resemblance to me. When they murdered her and dressed her in my clothes, the deception was complete enough to fool even those who knew me well. Her hands clenched into fists. They disfigured her face, claimed wild animals had ravaged the body. No one looked too closely. Who? Who orchestrated this? Lord Commander Aldwyn leads the conspiracy, but he's not alone. Chancellor Mortis, Captain Varick of the Eastern Guard, even some of the noble houses. They've been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to eliminate the royal line and seize power. Gareth felt the world tilting beneath his feet. These were men he'd served alongside, respected, trusted. Why spare you? Why not simply kill you with the others? Because I escaped before they could complete their plan. A loyal servant warned me. Dear Millicent paid for her loyalty with her life. I've been hiding in the outer provinces ever since, gathering evidence, building alliances with those still loyal to the true crown. The king, the queen, poisoned during a private dinner, made to look like sudden illness. I was meant to die the same night, but Millicent's warning saved me. Tears glistened in her eyes. I've had 2 years to perfect my story, Gareth. 2 years to plan my return. A chill ran down his spine at her choice of words. Perfect your story? She met his gaze steadily. Poor phrasing. I've had 2 years to gather proof of their crimes. Tomorrow night, during the Harvest Festival, when the usurpers will all be gathered in the Great Hall, we strike. But I need someone inside the castle, someone they trust. You want me to betray my oath to the current king. I want you to honor your true oath to the rightful ruler of Caldris. Outside the chamber, Gareth thought he heard the whisper of footsteps on stone, but when he listened more intently, only silence remained. The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the starlit sky, its stones weathered by decades of neglect. Kyle pushed open the rotted wooden door, wincing as it creaked on rusted hinges. The woman who claimed to be Princess Liana followed close behind, her borrowed cloak rustling in the night wind. Inside, moonlight streamed through gaps in the collapsed roof, casting silver patches across the dust-covered floor. Kyle set down his pack and began gathering fragments of old wood scattered throughout the chamber. The princess, if that's truly who she was, sank onto a fallen beam, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. We can risk a small fire, Kyle said, striking flint to steel. The walls will contain the light. As flames began to dance, casting warm orange light across their faces, he studied her once more. In the firelight, her resemblance to the royal family was undeniable. The sharp cheekbones, the distinctive curve of her nose, even the way she held her head with unconscious regality. Yet doubt still gnawed at him like a persistent wound. "You said there were others involved in the conspiracy," he said, settling across from her, "besides the Queen. Who?" She stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Lord Commander Thorne, for one. He was instrumental in arranging my supposed death. Several other nobles whose names you wouldn't recognize. Minor houses seeking advancement through treachery." Kyle's blood ran cold. Thorne had been his mentor, the man who'd taught him everything about honor, duty, and service to the crown. "That's impossible. Lord Commander Thorne is the most loyal—" "The most loyal what?" Her laugh was bitter. "The most loyal conspirator, the most loyal murderer. Kyle! He was the one who gave the order for my execution. I saw his face when they dragged me to what I thought would be my death. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. No, you're lying. Thorne would never—" "Wouldn't he?" She leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the firelight like chips of emerald ice. "Think, Kale. Who has access to the royal chambers at all hours? Who could arrange for guards to be absent at crucial moments? Who could orchestrate the removal of a princess without questions being asked?" Kyle's mind raced, connecting dots he'd refused to see before. Thorne's recent meetings with unknown visitors, his insistence that certain guard rotations be handled personally, the way he'd dismissed questions about increased security around the royal wing. But why? Kyle's voice was barely a whisper. What could he possibly gain? Power, position, gold. She pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders. The Queen promised him lands in the eastern provinces, a title to match his ambitions. All he had to do was remove the one person who stood between her and complete control over my father. The king would never— "The king is dying, Kyle." Her words cut through his protests like a blade. "Has been for months. Haven't you noticed how rarely he appears in public anymore? How pale and weak he's become? The Queen has been slowly poisoning him, just as she tried to poison me." The revelation struck him speechless. He thought of the king's recent absences from court functions, the way palace physicians had been coming and going with increased frequency, the hushed conversations that stopped whenever guards approached. "The night they came for me," she continued, "I overheard them discussing the timeline. Father has perhaps weeks left, maybe less, once he's gone, and I was presumed dead. Nothing would stand between the Queen and absolute power. She could rule as regent indefinitely, claiming the throne must remain vacant until a suitable heir could be found." Kyle stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Through the broken stones he could see the distant glow of the capital. Somewhere in that maze of light and shadow, if she spoke truly, treachery was unfolding on a scale he could barely comprehend. "How did you escape?" he asked, not turning around. "If Thorne ordered your death, how are you here now?" "Sir Marcus Whitmore." The name was spoken with reverence. He was supposed to carry out the execution in secret, but when the moment came, he couldn't murder an innocent girl. Instead, he helped me fake my death and flee the city. He stayed behind to maintain the deception, knowing it would likely cost him his life. Kyle knew Whitmore, an older knight with graying hair and kind eyes. If anyone in the guard possessed the courage for such defiance, it would be him. "Where is he now?" Kyle asked. "Dead, most likely, or worse." Her voice carried a weight of guilt. They would have discovered his betrayal eventually. Marcus knew that, but he chose to save me anyway. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, sending sparks spiraling up toward the broken roof. Kyle felt the foundations of his world shifting beneath him, everything he'd believed crumbling like the ancient stones around them. If she spoke truth, then he faced an impossible choice: maintain his oath of loyalty to superiors who were traitors, or commit treason himself in service of a greater justice. The abandoned watchtower stood like a skeletal finger against the storm, darkened sky, its crumbling stones weathered by decades of neglect. Kyle pushed through the rusted door, supporting Liana as she stumbled inside. The circular chamber reeked of decay and bat droppings, but it offered shelter from the driving rain that had begun to fall. "We can't stay here long," Kyle muttered, settling her against the curved wall. Through the narrow windows, he could see torchlight flickering in the distance, search parties spreading out from the palace like spiders across a web. Lyanna pressed her palm against her wounded shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers. "They're moving faster than I expected. Aldrich must be desperate." Her voice carried a bitter edge that made Kyl's skin crawl. "You still haven't told me everything." He crouched before her, studying her face in the dim light filtering through the arrow slits. "Who else is involved in this conspiracy? How deep does it go?" She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "How deep?" Her eyes glittered with something between madness and despair. "It goes to the very heart of the kingdom, Kyle. The rot has spread everywhere." Before he could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the moor. Kyle pressed himself against the window, peering out at the approaching riders. 6 palace guards in full armor, led by Captain Thorne himself. His heart sank. If Thorne was personally hunting them, Aldrich considered this matter of utmost importance. "They found our trail," he whispered. Lyanna struggled to her feet, her face pale but determined. "There's another way out. The old smuggler's tunnel beneath the tower. It leads to the river caves." "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I used it before." Her admission hung in the air like a blade. "The night I supposedly died, I discovered Aldrich meeting with Lord Corwin in those caves. They were discussing the poison that would kill my father and the circumstances of my own death." Kyle felt the world tilt beneath him. Lord Corwin was the king's oldest friend, his most trusted advisor. "That's impossible. Corwin has served the crown for 30 years. 30 years of planning." Lyanna's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's been positioning himself, eliminating threats, ensuring that when my father dies, the succession will fall to someone he can control." The hoofbeats grew louder. Kyle could hear Thorne shouting orders to his men surrounding the tower. In moments they would discover the forced entry. "Show me this tunnel," Kyle said. Lyanna led him to a corner where the stones had crumbled away, revealing a narrow opening that descended into blackness. She squeezed through first, and Kyle followed, his armor scraping against the rough walls. The passage was barely wide enough for a man, carved roughly through solid rock. Behind them, he heard the crash of the tower door being kicked open, followed by heavy footsteps and the ring of drawn steel. Thorne's voice echoed down from above. "Search everything. They can't have gone far." The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly downward, and Kyle began to wonder if Lyanna was leading him into a trap. But what choice did he have? Every instinct screamed that she was telling the truth, even as his training demanded skepticism. "There," she breathed, pointing ahead to where pale light filtered through another opening. They emerged into a natural cavern where an underground stream gurgled in the darkness. The sound of running water would mask their voices, but it also meant they couldn't hear their pursuers. "We need to reach the capital," Lyanna said, wringing water from her torn dress. "There's someone there who can help us, someone who knows the truth about Corwin's network." "Who?" "Master Aldwin, the royal physician. He was forced to prepare the poison that will kill my father, but his conscience has been eating at him. He sent me a coded message 3 days ago, begging for forgiveness and offering to testify." Kyle's mind raced. Aldwin had tended the royal family for 20 years, had delivered Lyanna herself. If he was part of this conspiracy, how many others were involved? How many people Kyle had trusted, served alongside, called friends? "Even if we reach the capital," he said, "even if Aldwin testifies, who will believe us? Corwin's word carries more weight than a supposedly dead princess and a disgraced guard." Lyanna's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cold and urgent. "Because I have proof. Hidden in my chambers, behind a loose stone in the hearth, are copies of their correspondence. Names, dates, plans, everything." A new sound echoed through the cavern, the splash of boots in water. Their pursuers had found the tunnel. "Then we'd better move fast," Kyle said grimly, drawing his sword. "Because if we're caught now, that evidence dies with us." As they plunged deeper into the cave system, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that each step carried them further from everything he'd believed about honor, duty, and truth. But there was no turning back now. The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the dawn sky, its crumbling stones offering the perfect refuge for two fugitives who had nowhere else to turn. Gareth pressed his back against the cold wall, listening for any sound of pursuit, while Lyanna knelt beside a small fire she'd managed to coax from dried moss and broken timber. "Tell me about the night you supposedly died," Gareth said, his voice barely above a whisper. The doubt that had been gnawing at him since they fled the city demanded answers. "That's impossible. Prince Aldrich died in a hunting accident 3 months ago." A bitter smile crossed her lips. Did he? Or was that simply another convenient death to cover their tracks? She pulled a folded parchment from her bodice, its edges stained with what looked like old blood. "I took this before I fled. Read it." Gareth unfolded the document carefully, his eyes scanning the elegant script. The letter was dated just 2 weeks ago, long after Aldrich's reported death. It detailed troop movements along the West March border and mentioned payment to someone identified only as the Raven for services rendered. At the bottom, a seal he recognized made his blood turn cold. "Lord Commander Thorn's seal," he breathed. "My father's most trusted advisor, the man who pronounced me dead and comforted the kingdom in its grief." Lyanna's voice carried a venom that made Gareth step back. "The man who tried to have me killed when I confronted him with what I'd learned." The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. Thorn's insistence that Gareth patrol the outer districts, his convenient absence during the night watches, the way certain guards had been reassigned or sent on distant missions, even Gareth's own posting. Had it been orchestrated to ensure he'd be the one to find Lyanna? "Why me?" he asked. "If Thorn wanted you dead, why arrange for me to discover you?" "Because you're known for your loyalty and honor. If Sir Gareth the Steadfast brought in the mad woman claiming to be a dead princess, who would question your word when you reported her as delusional? A convenient way to discredit any future claims I might make." A chill ran down Gareth's spine. He'd been a pawn in a game he hadn't even known he was playing. "But I believed you." "Yes," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "That was their miscalculation. They underestimated both your integrity and their own desperation." A sound from below made them both freeze. Voices carried up through the morning mist, followed by the distinctive jingle of mail and spurs. Gareth crept to the narrow window and peered down to see a dozen royal guards spreading out around the tower's base. "They've found us," he whispered, drawing his sword. Lyanna extinguished the fire with dirt, plunging them into dim shadows. "There's another way out. A passage my brothers and I discovered as children. Follow me." She led him to what appeared to be a solid stone wall, but her fingers found hidden handholds and pressed against a section that swung inward with a grinding sound. Cool air rushed out from the darkness beyond. "Where does it lead?" "The old crypts beneath Ravenshallow Cemetery. From there, we can reach the abandoned monastery at Thornwick." Gareth hesitated. Once he entered that passage, there would be no turning back. He'd be branded a traitor, hunted like a common criminal. His oath to the crown, his years of faithful service, all would be meaningless. Gareth Lyanna's hand touched his arm. "I know what I'm asking of you. But if we don't stop this, my father will die, and our kingdom will fall to wolves in sheep's clothing." Footsteps echoed in the stairwell below. Shouts grew closer. "There's something else," she continued urgently. "The Raven. I think I know who it is. Someone close to the king, someone who could poison him slowly enough to make it seem like natural illness." "Who?" "I need to be certain before I accuse. But Gareth, if I'm right, my father doesn't have long. The wedding was meant to be the signal for the final phase of their plan." The sound of boots on stone was almost upon them. Gareth looked into Lyanna's eyes and saw not madness or deception, but desperate truth and barely contained fear. He thought of King Aldwyn, who had shown him kindness when he was just a common soldier. He thought of the kingdom he'd sworn to protect. "Lead the way, Your Highness." They slipped into the darkness just as the first guard reached the chamber above, the hidden door sealing silently behind them. In the absolute blackness of the ancient passage, Gareth followed the sound of Lyanna's breathing and wondered if he was saving his kingdom or damning his soul. The ancient sewers beneath the royal quarter reeked of centuries of decay, but Gareth pressed forward through the knee-deep water, one hand steadying Lyanna against his shoulder. Her breathing had grown more labored over the past hour, and the makeshift bandage around her wounded arm was soaked through with blood. "We're almost there," he whispered, though he wasn't entirely certain himself. The tunnel maps brother Marcus had sketched were crude at best, drawn from half-remembered tales of smugglers and thieves. Lyanna stumbled, her weight pulling them both toward the slimy wall. "Gareth, I need to tell you something. About the night I supposedly died. Save your strength. We can talk once we're safe." "No." Her grip tightened on his arm with surprising force. "Listen to me. There was another woman, someone who looked like me. They used her body, made everyone believe she was the princess." Gareth's blood chilled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying my uncle didn't just plan to kill me. He planned to replace me entirely. The woman they buried in the royal crypts, she was innocent. Some merchant's daughter who had the misfortune of resembling me." Lyanna's voice cracked. "I escaped only because she took my place in death." The implications crashed over Gareth like a tide. If Lord Aldrich had gone to such lengths, orchestrating not just an assassination but an elaborate substitution, then the conspiracy ran deeper than either of them had imagined. How many people would have to be involved in something like that? More than we've accounted for. The royal physician who examined the body, the servants who prepared her for burial, even some of the guards who supposedly found me. Lyanna paused, studying his face in the dim torchlight, including possibly some you trust. Gareth's mind raced through the events of that terrible night 3 months ago. He'd been assigned to the outer walls, conveniently away from the princess's chambers. Captain Brennan had delivered the news personally, his face grim but not surprised. Too unsurprised, perhaps. A splash echoed from somewhere behind them in the tunnels. Gareth froze, straining to listen above the drip of water and their own labored breathing. Another splash, closer this time, followed by the scrape of boots against stone. "They've found the entrance," he breathed. Without waiting for a response, Gareth swept Lyanna into his arms and began moving as quickly as the treacherous footing would allow. The tunnel ahead curved sharply to the right, and according to Marcus's map, it should connect to a wider passage that led toward the merchant district. "There!" Lyanna pointed to an opening partially concealed by hanging roots and debris. "That has to be it." They squeezed through the gap just as torchlight flickered around the curve behind them. Voices echoed off the tunnel walls. At least 3 men, maybe more. Gareth recognized Captain Brennan's distinctive bark, even distorted by the acoustics. "Split up. Check every passage. They can't have gone far with her injured." The new tunnel was mercifully wider and shallower, allowing them to move more quickly. But Lyanna was fading fast, her skin pale and cold to the touch. They needed shelter, medical attention, and time to plan their next move. "There's a safe house," she whispered as they hurried through the darkness. "One of my mother's old friends runs an apothecary in the lower market, Mira Blackthorn. She helped arrange secret meetings when Mother was gathering support against my uncle's influence. Can you trust her?" "I have to. She loved my mother like a sister. When I was small, she would sneak tonics to me when I was ill, things the royal physician said were unnecessary." Lyanna managed a weak smile. She never trusted the court doctors. They emerged from the sewers through a grate hidden behind a tangle of thorn bushes in an abandoned lot. The pre-dawn air felt impossibly fresh after the putrid underground atmosphere. Gareth helped Lyanna to her feet, noting how she favored her left side now. The lower market was still largely deserted, though a few early merchants were beginning to set up their stalls. Gareth pulled his hood low and guided Lyanna through the narrow streets, every shadow potentially hiding an enemy. Blackthorn's apothecary occupied the ground floor of a narrow building wedged between a bakery and a leather worker's shop. The windows were dark, but Lyanna led him around to a side door and knocked in a specific pattern. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more, pause, then 1. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, with steel-grey hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Those eyes widened as they took in Lyanna's face. "Sweet, merciful gods," Mira Blackthorn breathed. "Elena, you're alive." "Hello, Aunt Mira." Lyanna swayed on her feet. "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door, but I didn't know where else to go." Mira's gaze shifted to Gareth, assessing and suspicious. "And who might this be?" "Someone who chose truth over duty," Lyanna said softly, just before she collapsed. The abandoned watchtower loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a broken tooth. Kyle pressed himself against the crumbling stone wall, listening for any sound that might betray an ambush. Rain drummed steadily on the ancient battlements above, but beneath that rhythmic percussion, he caught something else, the soft murmur of voices. If she was truly Princess Lyanna at all. The doubt gnawed at him as he slipped inside. 3 days had passed since their encounter in the forest, 3 days of sleepless nights plagued by questions he couldn't answer. The woman's story had too many convenient gaps, too many details that couldn't be verified. Yet something in her eyes, some indefinable quality, made him believe. Or perhaps that was exactly what she wanted. The tower's interior was a maze of collapsed timbers and rubble-strewn chambers. Kyle navigated by memory, recalling childhood explorations of this place when he'd been a page dreaming of glory. Now those dreams felt like another man's memories, distant and naive. A flicker of light drew him upward, past the rotting remains of wooden stairs to a chamber where firelight danced against weathered walls. He paused at the threshold, muscles coiled for violence. The woman sat bound to a chair in the center of the room, her golden hair matted with blood. But it wasn't the princess, or the woman claiming to be the princess. This was someone else entirely, someone whose face he recognized with a chill of recognition. "Lady Meredith," he breathed. The king's cousin raised her head with effort, her usually pristine appearance marred by cuts and bruises. "Sir Cale," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Thank the gods, I thought they would kill me before anyone came." He stepped into the chamber, scanning the shadows for hidden threats. "Who did this? Where is your precious princess?" A familiar voice echoed from the darkness above. "Oh, she's quite safe. For now." Kyle spun as a figure dropped from the rafters with predatory grace. The woman he'd known as Princess Lyanna landed in a crouch, but gone was any pretense of royal bearing. Her movements were those of a trained killer, fluid and precise. "You're not her," he said, though part of him had suspected this moment would come. She smiled, and it was nothing like the tentative expressions he remembered. "Very good, Sir Cale. Though I must say, you were wonderfully gullible for a supposedly elite guard. Then who are you?" "Someone who's been planning this for a very long time." She circled him slowly, staying just beyond sword reach. "Did you really think it was coincidence that you found me in that forest, that I appeared just as rumors of the princess's survival began to surface?" Kyle's mind raced, piecing together implications. "The real princess is quite dead, I assure you, has been for months, but her death presented certain opportunities for those clever enough to seize them." Lady Meredith struggled against her bonds. "Don't listen to her, Cale. She's one of them, one of the conspirators who murdered the royal family." "Murdered?" The false princess laughed. "Such a crude word. We prefer to think of it as succession planning." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "You're working with Lord Cassius, among others. The kingdom needs strong leadership, not the weakness that plagued the old regime. But transitions of power require careful orchestration. Having a surviving princess appear to legitimize certain claims was always part of the design. Kyle drew his sword, the blade singing as it cleared the scabbard. "And now that you've played your part, now comes the tragic finale. The brave Royal Guard, driven mad by grief and guilt, murders the king's cousin before taking his own life, all because he couldn't save his beloved princess from her terrible fate. She produced a pair of curved daggers from beneath her cloak, their edges gleaming in the firelight. Don't make this harder than necessary, Sir Kyle. You were never meant to survive this conspiracy. Your loyalty made you useful, but now it makes you dangerous. My loyalty was to the crown," he said, settling into a fighting stance, "to the real royal family. The real royal family is dead. The crown belongs to whoever has the strength to claim it." She moved like quicksilver, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Kyle barely got his sword up in time to deflect her first strike, the impact sending vibrations up his arm. She spun away from his riposte, already launching her second attack. This wasn't the desperate flight of a frightened princess. This was a duel with a master assassin. As they circled each other in the firelight, Lady Meredith's terrified breathing the only sound besides the ring of steel on steel, Kyle realized that everything he'd believed about the conspiracy was wrong. The real plot was far more ambitious than he'd imagined. The underground passage stretched endlessly ahead, carved from ancient stone and slick with centuries of moisture. Kyle's torch cast dancing shadows on the walls as he followed Lyanna deeper into the bowels of the palace. The air grew colder with each step, carrying whispers of forgotten secrets. "How do you know about these tunnels?" Kyle asked, his voice echoing off the narrow walls. Lyanna glanced back, her face pale in the flickering light. "My father showed them to me when I was young. He said every royal should know the palace's hidden ways." She paused, touching a carved symbol on the wall. "Emergency routes," he called them. "I never imagined I'd need them like this." They emerged into a wider chamber where multiple passages converged. Lyanna moved with certainty, choosing the leftmost tunnel without hesitation. Kyle marveled at her knowledge, unless this too was part of an elaborate performance. The doubt gnawed at him like a persistent wound. "The council chamber is directly above us," she whispered, as they climbed a spiral staircase carved into living rock. "There's an alcove behind the tapestry of King Aldric's coronation. We can listen from there." Kyle extinguished his torch as they reached a concealed door. Through the gaps in the stone, firelight seeped from the chamber beyond. Lyanna pressed her ear to the wall, then carefully manipulated a hidden mechanism. The door opened silently, revealing a narrow space behind an ornate tapestry. The council chamber buzzed with urgent conversation. Through the heavy fabric, Kyle could make out familiar voices: Lord Commander Thorne's gravelly tone, Chancellor Aldwyn's nasal inflection, and others he recognized from years of palace service. "Situation grows more precarious by the hour," Thorne was saying. "The Northern Lords are asking questions about the princess's death. Lord Garrett demands to see her body before the funeral." "Impossible," came another voice. Duke Ravencrest. "The body was too damaged. We've already explained this." Kyle felt Lyanna tense beside him. Her breathing had become shallow, controlled. Chancellor Aldwyn's voice cut through the murmurs. "Perhaps we acted too hastily. Faking her death was meant to buy time, but now we're committed," interrupted a woman's voice that made Kyle's blood freeze. "Lady Morwyn, the king's own sister. She discovered too much about our arrangements with Valdris. She would have exposed everything. The trade agreements alone would have meant our heads," Duke Ravencrest added. "Selling military intelligence to a neighboring kingdom during peace negotiations. The king would have executed us all." Lyanna's hand found Kyle's arm, her grip tight with suppressed emotion. He could feel her trembling. "What of the guard who found her body?" This was a new voice. Sir Marcus, another knight of the Royal Guard. "Kyle has been asking questions, pressing the healers about the wounds." Lord Commander Thorne's response chilled Kyle to the bone. "Kyle Brennan is a problem we can solve. His loyalty to the crown makes him predictable. A tragic accident during patrol, perhaps. Bandits are so troublesome these days." The casual discussion of his murder struck Kyle like a physical blow. These men he had served faithfully, whose orders he had followed without question, spoke of killing him as if discussing the weather. "And if she's truly dead?" asked another council member. "If her body surfaces? Then we maintain our story," Lady Morwen said coldly. "She died in the attack we staged. The kingdom grieves, and we proceed with our plans. Prince Aldrich assumes the throne early, with us as his trusted advisors." "Aldrich is weak," Thorne observed. "Easier to control than his sister ever was." "The princess was always too curious, too intelligent for her own good," Chancellor Aldwyn agreed. "She would have made a terrible queen, too principled." Kyle heard the soft scrape of chairs as the council members rose from the table. "We reconvene tomorrow night," Lady Morwen announced. "By then, I want solutions to our remaining problems, all of them." The council began to disperse, their voices fading as they left through various exits. Kyle and Lyanna waited in tense silence until the chamber fell quiet, then carefully retraced their steps through the hidden passage. Only when they had descended well below the main palace levels did Lyanna finally speak. "Now you know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They tried to kill me because I discovered their treason. They're selling secrets to Valdris, weakening our kingdom's position in the peace negotiations." Kyle's mind reeled with the implications. The trade routes, the military intelligence, they're profiting while endangering the realm. "And they'll kill anyone who threatens to expose them," Lyanna added bitterly, "including a loyal guard who asks too many questions." They had reached another chamber, this one furnished with simple furniture and supplies. Lyanna lit an oil lamp, casting warm light over what appeared to be a safe house. "You still don't fully trust me," she observed, studying his face. "I can see it in your eyes." Kyle met her gaze steadily. The evidence of his ears warred with the suspicions in his heart. "Trust is earned through actions, Your Highness, not words." "Then let me prove myself," she said quietly. "Help me stop them." The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the storm-darkened sky, its crumbling stones slick with rain. Kyle pressed himself against the outer wall, listening for any sound that might indicate pursuit. The princess, if she truly was who she claimed, had chosen their refuge well. The old structure had been forgotten by most, left to decay after the Eastern border wars ended a decade ago. "Inside, quickly," she whispered, pulling open a heavy wooden door that groaned on rusted hinges. The interior was dim and musty, but mercifully dry. Shafts of grey light filtered through gaps in the stonework, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stale air. The princess moved with practiced ease, suggesting she had been here before. She led him up a narrow spiral staircase to the second level, where the windows offered a commanding view of the surrounding countryside. "We can see anyone approaching from here," she said, settling near one of the openings. "And there's another way out through the old grain chute if needed." Kyle studied her profile as she gazed out at the rain-swept landscape. Even bedraggled and exhausted, there was something unmistakably regal about her bearing. But doubt continued to gnaw at him like a persistent wound. "You knew about this place," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I used to come here as a child," she replied without looking at him. "When court life became too suffocating, my guards thought I was in the library or the gardens, but I would slip away here to think." The princess never left the palace without a full escort. Now she did turn, and her eyes held a mixture of sadness and something that might have been pity. "You know only what you were meant to know, Kale, just as I knew only what they allowed me to learn. We were both kept in cages. Yours simply had longer chains." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain intensified, drumming against the stones with increasing fury. In the distance, barely visible through the downpour, Kyle caught sight of movement. Riders, perhaps a dozen of them, picking their way along the muddy road below. "There," he said, pointing. The princess peered out, then cursed under her breath. "Palace guards. They're moving systematically, checking every building. Because they're looking for criminals who fled the execution." Kyle's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt, or because they're silencing witnesses to their conspiracy. Does it matter? Either way, they mean to kill us. She was right, and the realization sent ice through his veins. Whether she was truly Princess Lyanna or an elaborate impostor, the men hunting them served the same master who had orchestrated tonight's bloody charade, the same power that had branded Kyle a traitor for doing his sworn duty. "The grain chute you mentioned," he said. "Where does it lead?" "To the old storage cellar. There's a tunnel that connects to the ruins of the miller's house about half a mile north. We could reach it unseen if we move now." Below, the riders had spread out, approaching the watchtower from multiple directions. Kyle could make out the gleam of steel beneath their cloaks, the purposeful way they moved. These were not men conducting a routine search. "Go," he said, drawing his sword. "I'll hold them here as long as I can." "Don't be a fool." She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You can't fight them all. Besides, I need you alive." "Why?" "If you're truly the princess, any loyal subject could help you reclaim your throne." Her laugh held no humor. "Because you're the only one who was there, the only witness to what really happened in that cell. Without your testimony, I'm just another pretender with a wild story." The sound of hoofbeats on stone echoed from below as the first riders reached the tower's base. Voices called out, organizing the search. They would find the entrance soon enough. "And if you're not the princess?" Kyle asked. "If this is all some elaborate deception?" She met his eyes steadily. "Then you'll discover the truth soon enough. But if you die here, you'll never know, and the real killers will go free." It was a compelling argument, though Kyle suspected she knew that. Everything about this woman seemed calculated, from her strategic choice of refuge to the way she presented each revelation. Yet beneath the careful planning, he sensed something genuine, a core of pain and anger that felt too raw to be feigned. Heavy footsteps echoed up the stairwell below. Time had run out. "The chute," he said. She led him to a narrow opening, hidden behind a pile of rotted timber. The passage beyond was cramped and treacherous, but it angled downward into blessed darkness. As they squeezed through, Kyle heard the guards burst into the chamber above, their curses filling the air. In the suffocating confines of the chute, pressed against stone worn smooth by decades of grain, Kyle found himself following a woman who might be his kingdom's lost princess into the depths of a conspiracy that threatened everything he had sworn to protect. The only certainty was that there would be no turning back. The hidden passage wound deeper into the castle's foundations than Marcus had ever imagined possible. Their torches cast dancing shadows on walls that seemed to pulse with ancient secrets, and the air grew thicker with each step. Princess Lyanna moved ahead of him with surprising confidence, her hand trailing along the stone as if guided by memory. "You've been here before," Marcus observed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Many times. As a child, I discovered these tunnels during my lessons with the castle's historian. Master Aldrich thought it important that I know every secret of my future domain." Her laugh held no humor. Little did he know he was preparing me for my own survival. They paused at a junction where 3 passages converged. Lyanna pressed her ear to the wall, listening. In the distance, Marcus could hear the faint echo of boots on stone. Their pursuers had found the entrance. "This way," Lyanna whispered, choosing the leftmost path. "We're almost there." The passage began to slope upward, and Marcus noticed the walls changing from rough-hewn stone to more refined masonry. Ancient tapestries hung in tatters from iron hooks, and the remains of long-extinguished braziers lined their route. This wasn't just a tunnel, it was a forgotten wing of the castle itself. "The old throne room," Lyanna explained, as they emerged into a vast chamber. "Before the great renovation 2 centuries ago, this was the heart of the kingdom." Marcus raised his torch higher, revealing the skeletal remains of grandeur. A massive throne sat at the far end, its once golden surface now tarnished black. Cracked marble columns supported a ceiling lost in shadows, and beneath their feet lay a mosaic depicting the royal coat of arms, but not the current one. This was older, with subtle differences that spoke of a different lineage entirely. "The evidence is here," Lyanna said, moving toward a section of wall near the throne. She pressed against what appeared to be solid stone, and a section swung inward with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud in the ancient space. The hidden chamber beyond contained a treasure trove of documents, scrolls, and artifacts. But these weren't riches in the traditional sense. They were secrets, maps with different borders, treaties with kingdoms Marcus had never heard of, and portraits of royalty whose faces bore no resemblance to the current royal line. Marcus felt the world shifting beneath his feet. That's impossible. The genealogies, the records, all falsified, all carefully constructed lies. She pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. "This belonged to my great-grandfather's court mage. He documented everything, the poisonings, the false proclamations, the bribes and threats used to secure cooperation from the nobility." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the passage they'd just left. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. Marcus drew his sword, positioning himself between Lyanna and the entrance. "There's more," she continued urgently, gathering additional documents. "The current conspiracy isn't just about maintaining power, it's about covering up this original sin. But someone survived, someone from the true bloodline." "Who?" Marcus demanded, even as his mind reeled from the implications. "Captain Aldwin." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. His family name was changed, his heritage hidden, but he carries the true royal blood. That's why he had to die, not because he discovered my father's corruption, but because someone revealed his true identity. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Aldwin's strange knowledge of court protocols, his uncanny ability to navigate political situations, the way the older servants had always shown him a deference that went beyond his rank. "The letter," Marcus breathed, "the one that was supposed to implicate you in his murder, was meant to silence us both, remove the dead princess who knew too much, and eliminate any investigation into Aldwin's death." Lyanna's eyes blazed with determination. "But they made a mistake. They didn't realize I had access to these records, or that I would survive their first attempt on my life." The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by the flicker of torchlight in the passage. Marcus counted at least 6 sets of boots, moving with the coordination of trained soldiers. "We need another way out," he said. Lyanna smiled grimly, stuffing the crucial documents into a leather satchel. The beauty of a castle built on centuries of secrets. There's always another way out. She moved to the far wall, where another hidden mechanism revealed a narrow stair ascending into darkness. But as they prepared to flee, a voice echoed from the ancient throne room behind them. "Princess Lyanna, Sir Marcus, I believe it's time we had a proper conversation." Marcus recognized the voice immediately, and his blood ran cold. Standing in the entrance to their sanctuary, flanked by armed guards, was the one person he had never suspected. The Queen herself had come to ensure their silence. The abandoned watchtower loomed against the storm-darkened sky, as Marcus pressed his back against the cold stone wall, listening for pursuit. Rain hammered the crumbling battlements above, masking the sound of their ragged breathing. Princess Lyanna sat hunched in the corner, her stolen cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the narrow window that offered their only escape route. "They'll find us here," she whispered, voice barely audible above the wind. "Aldrich's men know every hiding place in the kingdom." Marcus checked his sword, the blade still stained with blood from their desperate flight through the castle corridors. 3 guards lay dead behind them, men he'd once called brothers-in-arms, now obstacles between him and the truth. The weight of their deaths pressed heavy on his conscience, but Lyanna's revelations had shattered everything he'd believed about honor and duty. "The merchant's cart," he said, peering through the gloom at the muddy road below. "If we can reach it before dawn, we might make the border." Lyanna's laugh held no humor. "You still think we can outrun this? Aldrich has had 3 years to perfect his web of lies. Every magistrate, every noble house, every captain of the guard believes his version of events. We're not just fugitives, Marcus. We're ghosts fighting shadows. Thunder crashed overhead, and in its wake came the distant sound of hoofbeats. Marcus tensed, counting at least a dozen horses approaching fast. The search party had found their trail despite the storm. "The tunnels," Lyanna said, suddenly rising to her feet. "There's an old smuggler's passage that runs beneath the tower. It connects to the abbey cellars." "How do you—" Marcus began, then stopped himself. After everything she'd revealed about the palace's hidden passages and secret alliances, questioning her knowledge seemed pointless. She was already moving toward a section of wall that looked identical to the rest, her fingers tracing patterns in the weathered stone. With a grinding sound that made Marcus wince, a narrow opening appeared. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of centuries-old secrets. "My father used these passages during the border wars," she explained, ducking into the darkness. "He said a ruler should know every secret of their kingdom, especially the ones that didn't appear on any map. Aldrich's men, disguised and paid well for their silence. They were supposed to kill everyone, make it look like I'd died with the rest. But I'd switched carriages with my maid at the last moment, following rumors of a plot against me. Poor Elena died wearing my clothes while I watched from the woods, too terrified to help her." The tunnel branched ahead, and Lyanna chose the left path without hesitation. Water dripped from somewhere in the darkness, counting out seconds with metronomic precision. "For 3 years I've been gathering evidence," she continued. "Names, dates, bribes, murders, everything needed to expose the truth. But evidence means nothing if there's no one left alive to present it." They emerged into a wider chamber, ancient wine racks still lining the walls. Lyanna extinguished her torch and motioned for Marcus to do the same. Pale light filtered down from somewhere above, along with the sound of chanting. "The Abbey's morning prayers," she whispered. "We're directly beneath the sanctuary." Marcus heard something else, footsteps in the tunnel behind them, growing closer. Their pursuers had found the passage. There, Lyanna pointed to iron rungs set into the wall. "The ladder leads to the altar chamber." "But Marcus—" She turned to face him, and in the dim light he saw something that chilled him more than the approaching danger. "If we surface in the middle of morning prayers, if innocent people die because of our presence, can you live with that?" The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by the flicker of torchlight on stone walls. Marcus looked up at the ladder, then back at the woman who had destroyed his world and replaced it with terrible truth. His hand found his sword hilt as the first shadow appeared at the tunnel mouth. The choice was made for them. Grew louder, accompanied now by the flicker of torchlight on stone walls. Marcus looked up at the ladder, then back at the woman who had destroyed his world and replaced it with terrible truth. His hand found his sword hilt as the first shadow appeared at the tunnel mouth. The choice was made for them. The hidden passage beneath the palace stretched endlessly before them, carved stone walls weeping with centuries of moisture. Sir Marcus kept his sword drawn, every shadow a potential threat as they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. Behind him, Princess Lyanna moved with surprising grace for someone who had supposedly been dead for 3 months. "The servant quarters connect through here," she whispered, her voice echoing softly off the damp walls. "Father had these passages built during the border wars, in case the palace fell." Marcus nodded, though doubt gnawed at him like a persistent wound. Her knowledge of the castle's secrets was intimate, detailed, yet something felt rehearsed about her explanations, too perfect, too convenient. They emerged into a narrow alcove behind the kitchen pantries. Through gaps in the stonework, Marcus could hear the distant sounds of preparation, servants readying for the evening meal, unaware that their world was about to shatter. The normalcy of it struck him as obscene, given what they carried, evidence that would topple the crown itself. "The documents we took from Chancellor Aldrich's chambers," Marcus said quietly, pulling the leather satchel closer. "Your brother's correspondence with the Valdoran emissaries, the signed orders for your murder. It's enough to start a war," Lyanna finished. Her green eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there in her youth. Death, real or feigned, had changed her. Edmund won't simply abdicate when confronted. He'll claim the documents are forgeries, that I'm an imposter. Marcus studied her face in the dim light filtering through the stone gaps. Sometimes, when she spoke of strategy and betrayal, she seemed like a stranger wearing familiar features. Then we need allies. Lords who still remember their oath to your father. Lord Garrett of Westmarch, she said without hesitation. He commands the northern garrisons. And Lady Morven, she controls the grain stores. If we can reach them before Edmund discovers we've escaped. She trailed off, tilting her head towards sounds from above. Footsteps, heavy boots on stone, many of them. Search every room, came a voice Marcus recognized. Captain Roderick, his former commander. The traitor couldn't have gone far. And the woman with him, bring her alive. His Majesty wants to question her personally. Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone, jaw clenched. Traitor. 3 months ago, he'd been the king's most trusted guard. Now he was hunted like a common criminal, all because he'd chosen to believe a bloodied woman in the forest who claimed impossible things. But the evidence was undeniable. The documents, the conspiracy, the careful orchestration of a princess's death to clear a path to the throne. Edmund had murdered his own sister for power, or tried to. The woman beside him bore every mark of royal blood, every mannerism he remembered from their childhood in these very halls. Yet doubt lingered. Marcus! Her hand touched his arm, gentle but urgent. There's another way. Through the old wine cellars to the postern gate. But we have to move now. He nodded, following her deeper into the passage. The tunnel sloped downward, air growing thicker with the scent of aged wine and dry rot. Lyanna moved with certainty, never hesitating at the frequent intersections. Either she truly knew these passages intimately, or she'd studied them with remarkable thoroughness. When I was 12, she said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts, I used to sneak down here to steal honey cakes from the kitchen stores. You caught me once, remember? You were so young then, barely older than I was. You made me promise to ask cook properly next time instead of stealing. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He did remember. A gap-toothed princess with flower in her dark hair, tearfully promising to be good. No one else knew that story. He'd never spoken of it. You kept that promise, he said softly, for nearly a week. Her laugh held genuine warmth. Then I was back to stealing, but I got better at not being caught. They reached a heavy wooden door bound with iron. Beyond it lay the wine cellars, then freedom. But as Lyanna lifted the latch, Marcus caught her wrist. Wait. She turned, eyebrow raised in question. That night in the forest, you said you escaped your attackers, but you never explained how. 3 armed men against 1 woman, and you simply got away? Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of what? Calculation? Fear? I was lucky, she said. They thought I was dead. When I regained consciousness, they were gone. It was the same answer she'd given before, word for word. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. Either she was telling the truth, or she'd rehearsed this deception with meticulous care. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the passage behind them. Marcus, she whispered urgently, we have to go. Now. He stared into those familiar green eyes, holding the face of someone he'd sworn to protect, wondering if he was about to make the greatest mistake of his life. The hidden chamber beneath the palace felt like a tomb, its ancient stones weeping with moisture that caught the flickering torchlight. Marcus pressed his back against the cold wall, listening to the echo of footsteps above as guards searched the corridors they had just fled. Beside him, Lyanna's breathing came in sharp, controlled bursts, her face pale but determined in the dancing shadows. They know we're here, she whispered, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the wall behind them. My uncle's men have sealed every exit from the upper levels. Marcus studied the passages branching away into darkness. 3 tunnels stretched before them like hungry mouths, each one potentially leading to freedom or a trap. The weight of his sword felt reassuring at his side. though he knew steel would be useless if they encountered the wrong enemies in these narrow confines. "Tell me about these tunnels," he said quietly. "If you truly are Princess Lyanna, you would have explored them as a child." Her eyes flashed with something between hurt and anger. "You still doubt me, even after everything we've discovered?" The question hung between them like a blade. Marcus had seen the evidence, the birthmark, the knowledge only the royal family possessed, the way she moved through the palace with intimate familiarity, yet doubt gnawed at him like a persistent wound. Too much had been orchestrated, too many coincidences had aligned perfectly. "The left passage leads to the old crypts," Lyanna continued, seeming to read his internal struggle. "The center tunnel connects to the wine cellars, but it's been partially collapsed for years. The right path—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The right path leads to my father's private study, which my uncle doesn't know exists." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. King Aldric's private study was legendary among the palace guard, a secret chamber where the monarch supposedly kept his most sensitive documents and treasures. Many believed it was merely a myth. "If we can reach it," Lyanna pressed on, "there will be evidence of the conspiracy. Documents, correspondence, perhaps even confessions my father gathered before his death. It's our only chance to prove the truth." The sound of metal scraping against stone echoed from above, closer now. Marcus could hear voices, gruff commands being issued, systematic searching. They had minutes at most before the guards found the concealed entrance to these tunnels. "How do I know this isn't exactly what you want?" Marcus asked, his voice harsher than he intended. "Leading me deeper into the palace, away from any escape route?" Lyanna turned to face him fully, and in the torchlight he saw tears glistening in her eyes, not of sadness, but of frustrated rage. "Because, you stubborn fool, if I were truly your enemy, I would have let you die 12 times over these past days. I would have led Uncle's men straight to you, instead of warning you about the ambush in the armory. I would have poisoned the water we shared in the forest instead of saving your life when you were wounded." Her words struck him like physical blows. She was right. There had been countless opportunities for betrayal, moments when trust had been his only shield. "And because," she continued, her voice breaking slightly, "I loved my father, and I've spent 3 years living like a ghost, watching my kingdom slowly die under a usurper's rule. Every day I delayed meant more suffering for our people, more nobles executed on false charges, more taxes bleeding the common folk dry." The footsteps above grew louder, accompanied by the scrape of furniture being moved. They were running out of time. Marcus made his choice. "The right tunnel," he said firmly, "but we go together, and if this is a trap—" "It's not." Lyanna was already moving, her hand briefly touching his arm in gratitude. "Trust me, Marcus. One last time." They plunged into the rightmost passage, their torch casting wild shadows on the curved walls. The tunnel was narrower than Marcus had expected, forcing them to move single file through the oppressive darkness. Behind them, he heard a shout. Someone had found the entrance. The passage began to slope upward, and Marcus realized they were climbing back toward the heart of the palace. If Lyanna was leading him into a trap, he would be walking directly into the center of enemy power with no hope of escape. But as they climbed, he found himself studying the woman ahead of him, the determined set of her shoulders, the careful way she tested each stone before putting her full weight on it, the protective manner in which she held the torch to light his way, as well as her own. This was not the behavior of a deceiver leading her victim to slaughter. This was a daughter coming home to reclaim her birthright. The tunnel ended abruptly at a blank wall, and for a moment Marcus felt his heart sink. Then Lyanna pressed a specific sequence of stones, and the wall swung inward with barely a whisper. Beyond lay King Aldric's legendary private study. The throne room fell silent, except for the crackling of torches against stone walls. Sir Gareth stood between two worlds, the familiar one where duty meant unquestioning loyalty to the crown, and this new reality where truth demanded he draw his sword against the man he'd served for 15 years. King Aldric's face twisted with fury as Princess Elara stepped from the shadows, very much alive, very much accusing. The bloodied woman Gareth had found in the forest 3 days ago now stood tall in borrowed armor, her green eyes blazing with righteous anger. "You killed my mother," Elara said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Poisoned her slowly so it would look like wasting sickness. Then you staged my death to eliminate any threat to your rule." "Lies," Aldric spat, but his hand moved instinctively toward his sword. "This woman is an impostor. My daughter died in the river. I saw her body myself." Gareth's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The closed casket funeral, the king's strange calmness during the mourning period, the way certain servants had simply vanished from the castle. "The body you showed the kingdom was my cousin Mira," Elara continued. "Same height, same build, easy enough to arrange when the fish have been at the flesh." Her voice cracked slightly. "Poor Mira. She died because she looked like me." The king laughed, but it sounded forced. "Even if this fantasy were true, who would believe you? A dead princess returned from the grave. The people will think you mad." "They might," Elara agreed, "but they'll believe Sir Marcus." From the gallery above, the castle's head steward emerged, flanked by 2 other guards. Sir Marcus looked haggard, his usual pristine appearance disheveled. In his hands he carried a wooden chest. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice formal but cold. "I believe it's time we discussed your private correspondence with Lord Blackthorn." Aldric's face went pale. "Marcus, you forget yourself." "I forget nothing, my lord, including the letters detailing your arrangement with our neighboring kingdom's spymaster. The ones where you agreed to weaken our borders in exchange for their support in eliminating the rightful heirs." Gareth felt the world shift beneath his feet. Not just murder then, but treason. The king he'd sworn to protect had been selling out the kingdom piece by piece. "Sir Gareth," Aldric said, his tone becoming desperate, "you've served me faithfully. These people are traitors, all of them. Arrest them in my name." For a heartbeat, Gareth's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Years of conditioning screamed at him to obey. But then he looked at Elara, really looked at her. The way she held her left shoulder slightly higher than her right, an old habit from a childhood riding accident. The small scar on her chin from falling out of an apple tree at age 8. The particular shade of green in her eyes that matched her mother's exactly. This was Princess Elara, alive, real, and asking him to choose justice over blind loyalty. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Gareth said quietly, stepping aside to clear Elara's path to the throne. "But my oath was to protect the crown, not the man who wears it." Aldric's expression shifted from desperate to dangerous. In one fluid motion, he drew his blade and lunged, not at Gareth, but at Elara. Gareth moved faster than thought, intercepting the strike with his own sword. Steel rang against steel in the echoing chamber. The king was skilled, but desperation made him reckless. Gareth had trained under the same masters, learned the same techniques, but he fought with purpose now instead of mere duty. The duel was brief and brutal. Aldric's blade slipped past Gareth's guard, opening a line of fire across his ribs. But the wound only drove Gareth forward. His counterattack was precise, driving his sword through the king's chest. Aldric fell, his crown rolling across the marble floor with a hollow ring. In the sudden silence, Elara walked slowly to the throne. She picked up the fallen crown, studying its bloodied gold in the torchlight. 20 years he wore this," she said softly. 20 years of my father's lies." "What happens now?" Gareth asked, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. Elara turned the crown over in her hands. "Now we tell the truth, all of it. The kingdom deserves to know what was done in their name." She looked up at him, and for a moment she was just the frightened girl he'd once taught to hold a sword. "Will you stand with me, Sir Gareth? As my protector, not as my subject?" Gareth knelt, not in the formal genuflection demanded by protocol, but in the deeper bow of someone choosing his own allegiance. "Always, Your Majesty, for truth, for justice, and for the kingdom we can build together. Outside, dawn was breaking over the castle walls, painting everything in shades of gold and hope.